Well, good evening. This is the third webinar of the 3P Pioneers from the Dutch-speaking 3P community, 3 Principles community. We are very proud and very pleased to have Dr. Keith Blevens with us tonight. We are so pleased that you would be able to bring us some more insight into the principles, and hopefully we'll learn a lot tonight. May I give you the floor, please?
Well, thank you. Thank you. This is my pleasure to meet you all and share with you. I I I really I honor you because um it's like a soul to soul conversation, and I really anytime something that intimate and something that meaningful transpires in my world, it's always an honor, always. So uh, 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 I'd be happy to answer questions of any sort. Maybe a little bit about myself. I don't know. I I just had the wonderful good fortune many years ago to meet Sydney Banks and to meet all the people that were around him. There was a kind of a community of people, not a groupie type thing or anything like that at all. Um, but they were extraordinary people who had been uh, listening to Sid, and they had changed just in the same way that you all have changed. Uh, uh, in one way or another, they had all heard something that kind of completed the circle for them, or something made sense, some sort of a deep logic that um, wasn't a body of knowledge that he was talking about. It was from another dimension, but it was from a dimension that they resonated to, just like everybody has the same truth inside them. And so I heard it too, and my wife heard it too, and it was so important to us, so helpful. It really did take a lot of the misunderstanding and the insecurity and the issues and the problems. It just um, had a way of kind of bypassing that. Like if you come up to a lake or a swamp and you're hiking or whatever, and there would be a path around it. It was just a way to go beyond our what we were thinking, and it still does that for me today. After all these many years, I think that was 1977, however long ago that was. But and I think we're all very fortunate to find something of that uh, simplicity and magnitude and impact. And who would think that such a bypass was even um, possible? I thought you had to work through things and process things, and it was hard work and et cetera, which is what I had learned in my graduate training. I had a doctorate, and but Sid was talking about something completely different, and I was profoundly interested in it. I didn't know what it was, but I knew that he knew what it was, and I knew that these other people that were around, they were on the same page about it. And so it was wonderful to see that it wasn't just for him. It was something that was teachable, something that was understandable, something that would incorporate because one person would be an insurance agent, another person would be a plumber. Most of the people around in those days were really working class people. They weren't professional people necessarily, but they were all such beautiful people, and they all had stories to say about how they were struggling and they were lost and they were going to get a divorce, or they were anxious or depressed or whatever. And so it was very heartening to hear their stories. That was one thing that really um, touched me, because I could see maybe one person like Sid having found something that was so very profound, which that in and of itself was, I'd never seen it before. But then that it was understandable and uh, spreadable, and people got found that same. And as he would explain, of course, it wasn't what he found, but it was what you find that's of the same nature of what he found. And so that was really quite an unusual thing. And he didn't set himself up as an expert or anything. He was always, always, always pure about that. He always honored what was pre-existing, and I think he found that. I know that he found that what pre-exists, the pre-existence of truth. And there was where everybody's truth is the same. He found that, and so when he talked from that, and I think it awakened the truth in the people that he shared it with. So it was like these little lights would go off, and people would change, just like Cecilia was. I was talking to her briefly before we started, and she described the same sort of thing, some sort of a clicking or a coming together or a profound simplicity that's almost unwordable, but was real. And it had such a powerful, humbling beauty to it that it just soothed the masses. So I was thinking the other night, I was talking to a group, and this is an example, but there was a group of people that gathered together that didn't really know anything about Sid, but the group that invited Sid in, which I was working with that group, they had their own culture and their own folks, and many of them, as I recall, many of them were Gestalt therapists, and many of them came from Europe. And we all met in the mountains in the mountains in California, and so I said, let's get Sid here. Let's bring Sid in, and so two or three of us decided we would do that. We were leaders in the organization, and Sid took his first airplane ride. Can you imagine? This was the first time he had been in an airplane, and we decided we'll send him a seaplane, that could land in this harbor where he could board, and he and Elsie Spittle, they agreed to do it. And so, and we flew them from that little place up in um, Salt Spring Island, flew them to this place in the Sierra Nevada mountains in California, and to this Girl Scout camp of all places. There was this vacant camp, and we'd rented this camp, and so I was on the phone. There was only one telephone in the whole place, and there were no cell phones that I recall. I don't think my probably cell phones that hadn't even been invented yet. So I was on the phone for hours and hours and hours to get all these have all these conversations with people. And Sid came in, and so the main body of the group was just were these Gestalt therapists, and they were really upset that this apparent organization had announced that they were going to stop working because their core leaders could not agree anymore. Sid had really innocently done something that just destroyed their own culture. And so they were not it was not a friendly group, and they were upset. And so which is really an unusual group for Sid to speak to, because usually everybody's really on board. They're really there to listen and embrace anything they can hear. And so that was not the case with this group. And there were maybe 90 people there. And so when he starts talking, the strangest thing happened. Like it was like a big cosmic wet blanket. Just it was like this wet burden, heaviness, just came over the whole of us, and we were just all stilled. And you could hear a pin drop, and there were no chairs moving around, no coughing, no. There were millions of crickets in the woods. It was in the woods, and so you could hear these crickets, and you can hear it on the recording today. We have a recording of this, and so it was a supernatural experience, which I wasn't accustomed to. And the talk was really short, maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes, I don't know, but it was really, really profound. And then he just walked right out of the auditorium, and there was no ill will. There's no hostile questions, or there wasn't a peep out of people. It was like he talked so beautifully and so profoundly that it silenced the room profoundly. I've never seen anything like it, nor have I seen anything like it since. And then after he was done, I'm not kidding. It must have been 15 minutes before anybody could move. You couldn't move. Can you imagine? This was odd to me. I've been in hundreds, maybe, I don't know, maybe several hundreds of classes and conversations and group meetings and et cetera, as most anyone has, but I've never seen anything like that. And those Gestalt therapists couldn't, I don't think they could talk. I think it was like Novocaine had come over the whole group, and there was no, I don't think they could think to talk. I couldn't think. I could not think. I was so quiet. And that was a really um, beautiful experience to hear, to see something like that, and to hear, and if you, and I know I assume you all have listened to his recordings, but they have that kind of sedative, quieting impact on you, don't they? You don't really, you can't think. It's really hard to keep thinking and listen to Citibank's talk. Really hard because he's talking from another dimension. And jumping ahead now, 40 some years, when um, he had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. He had had a cancer earlier, and then, um, it kind of went underground, I think, and for several years, but then it resurfaced. And when he did, it was terminal. And so this was in 2008, in December, about this time of year, actually. And he called Valda and I, and he said, I want to give you this book. And it's the last book that I've been working on, and I just don't want to work it any longer. And we said, well, why not? And he, because we didn't know of his condition, he said, well, the doctors have told me I won't live to see another year, a new year. This next new year will be the last one that I see. And we were like so sobered, you can imagine. And he he said, I want you to have it. I want you to, he says, I'll write an endorsement of the book. He said, I've never done that before, which he hadn't. He was very particular about um, that sort of thing because no one holds a candle to him, or no one. He was in another stratosphere, and so he wrote this beautiful endorsement. He sent me this text, which is quite comprehensive. Um, and I still hold it. I haven't published it yet. Um, and I'm it was a very humbling experience. It has been a very humbling experience to try to write with someone of his caliber. Um, but he would very sweetly put suggestions in there, and he would say, "Here, you could do this if you want, and talk about this." So you put these, and he put it in different colors of ink. You know, in your computer you can do black and white, and you can do green and red or whatever. And so I I've I and then he said, oh, and the only condition is you can't tell anybody I've given this to you. And I said, oh, well, why not? He said, well, because there are people in the community that really, really, really want this book. And they would, they, if they hear that I've given it to you, they won't let me rest. I will not have peace anymore the rest of my life, however short it is. And he died in May. So this was in December. And uh, he stipulated that. And I had trouble with it because I had a lot of other prior engagements and what have you. And so I called him and I said, well, what about this? I think I need to tell this person, and if I am working on this book, I can't do these other jobs. And he said, well, find a way to get out of it, but I don't want you to tell anyone. and he said, and then he reiterated again that his life would be the rest of his life would be a living, that's how he put it. It will be a living hell for me. And so I accepted it. And but I wanted to read you something that's in it because I thought this something very cogent. It's about 80 pages long. Here's a piece of it. And this is right toward the end of it. He so he's sharing these experiences, honest, from his own life, and and he's he says, I explained to the so he's talking about these um, an audience that he was talking to. He said, I explained to the audience how at times what I say sounds quite mystical and cannot be intellectually understood. He was always clarifying that, isn't he? I know anything you've listened to, he'll say that. It cannot be intellectually understood. That's why he would always talk about just listen. This is because what I say derives from another dimension, from the psychological understanding that is now practiced. So he knew what he could hear. People that came to him, he could hear that they were full of concepts and beliefs and theories and practices and techniques and uh, things that they thought were true, that they were holding in their minds, and he had no um, he couldn't relate to it. So he said, that's not, don't look there, look here. And so this other dimension, look in this other dimension from the psychological understanding that is now practiced. One is from the intellectual beliefs and concepts of this world we live in. The principles I talk about are from the spiritual understanding of the wisdom of the ages. What you have to realize is the intellectual understanding of human functioning and human behavior is created from the outside in. The spiritual understanding of all human behavior stems from the inside out. One is mortal and the other is immortal. And then he goes on to say, I was told because of this interview, approximately 6,000 people hit on YouTube. Many told stories of miraculous healings that had taken place in their lives just by listening to this. Among the storytellers were psychologists, psychiatrists, therapists, workers, police officials, ex-prisoners, and ordinary people. Yet not one word or investigation came of it. Later on, some therapists phoned me and suggested that the problem wasn't that the principles didn't work. The problem was they did work, and they were going against everything they were taught. And this is causing a considerable amount of fear and insecurity to many people because, when you have someone talking and saying something that you can't comprehend, you can only listen to, you only have a chance just to listen to it. And then later on, you think about it, you can think about it in a fearful way. And some people did, and it caused fear, which was the last thing that he wanted to ever create in any audience that he ever had. But people's minds, something that is that foreign, or that incomprehensible, or that's not, that they're not used to. Um, and then later on they fill in what they're afraid of, or what they didn't understand, and they think about that that creates the fear. And so he hated that would happen, but there was nothing he could do about it, really. He would just try to talk and hold people there as long as he could, but that's kind of what he was up against, and really, I think it's something that probably all of us are up against, is to communicate uh, as best we can, and not be misunderstood. But it's the misunderstanding can and does happen, doesn't it? You know, um, raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about. Like I'd say, yeah, yeah, exactly. Like that's just part of this story, is the misunderstanding of truth. That it's so simple and so profound that it, in some cases, it can't be heard, because the thinking system is so uh, pervasive and so fearful and so caught up in what it is addicted to, in a way, or it's crippled by. This is where the crippling is happening, and to penetrate that, um, the din of that, the the din of it, the noise of it, um, even if it gets penetrated and then it comes back up again, it can create fear. And and so, oh, I'm so sorry. Could you hold 1 second? Hello? I'm sorry. uh, Someone's coming over to service my television because it's on the blink, and so they're they're coming to my small town here. So, but that gap, um, has always been there, throughout my career, and all the clinics I've started, and I've lived all over the United States, and really the four corners of the United States, and so it's been a constant theme, and it was a constant theme for him here, even in his last book. So welcome to the world of having a new knowledge that is not uh, it's not possible to really, it's of another dimension. And uh, you have to you have to, if you're a teacher, or a practitioner, like with your family or your friends or whatever, you have to bridge that gap, and you have to do your best. And sometimes the bridge is built, and sometimes it's just other people won't let you build it. You try to build it and they'll tear it down. um when you look away, they'll tear it down because they don't they can't hear you. And so our job, is to um do everything we can to bridge that gap, because it's such a profound message. such a profound message that that if heard or when comprehended, it just heals and quiets the the cacophony, of insecure thinking and chatter and personal thinking, which is constantly moving and constantly figuring it out. And it just uh, is so opposite of that it's a blessing. It's truly, truly a blessing. I didn't know I would talk about this, but I think it's just a wonderful thing. And of course it would be like that, of course. I mean, you might think that people that are enlightened people would just say things right out loud and people would go, oh my goodness, thank you so much. And then it would just spread like wildfire, but it meets up against this fear and intellectualization and argument. And people say, well, I've read that yada yada yada, or so and so, I follow this other teacher or whatever, and they have their thoughts in mind. And he Sid chronicles that throughout my book. And he said this is your book, you can do with it what you want. So but very various snippets, and he has a conversation in there with one person who's beginning to get it and get excited about it, and the other person just won't have it. He just will not have it, and eventually he walks away. So that's an interesting thing, isn't it? It's really interesting. So maybe I'll stop. Maybe I could stop. Maybe this might be a place to stop. Answer any questions or share anything.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. Please do. Well, I'm gonna call our book, Valda and I's book, Suffering Needlessly. And that comes from Sid's own. It's actually, I think it's even in his endorsement. He said that I'm honored to see Dr. Blevens write this book in hopes that it might help psychology and psychiatry and in the world with suffering needlessly. And you could see how that's what creates the suffering needlessly. And when you see someone who is when that stops, or that they go beyond their thinking that is causing them to suffer needlessly, they're so grateful, and they're healed of that dogged chirping. And then they might start taking it again, but then it'll die off again. So it's just such an interesting thing. Now I'll shut up. Anybody want to say anything? Or
I'd like to say something, because I've also been curious about why individuals would come to this understanding and embrace it or dismiss it outright. And I used to teach a technique and talk with a gentleman who worked with patients who had a degenerative neurological diseases, and he wondered the same thing. He said, what is it that turns on the will to heal? And he certainly didn't have the answer. And I remember seeing a model construct, of course, about the, people will, like a third of the people will stay in their kind of their victim mode. And then, another third will be kind of survivors. And then there's like this, another third of the people will see something and be transformed by it. And there just seems to be no explaining humans.
Well, I don't think it's fair to say that it breaks out like that, because I know you can do that. And they do it in business. They always have three, or often have three groups, exactly like you're saying. And they might be mystified by it, but if you understand that it's thought, that middle level, the bottom level, it's thought that, and every time, like for all of us, probably every time whether you come and you're buried in it, or you're kind of seeing through it a little or whatever, but what disappears is personal thought. And if that personal, when that personal thought is unified with impersonal thought, which is a constant, it doesn't change, you have healing. And I don't think it's good of us. I mean, you can sort of try to explain that, or try to, but it's thought. uh, and so uh, it I think if we can accept it, because you don't know. And Sid would often say this, if you listen to him, he will say, you just don't know. That could be, you could be driving home after this, and then it's like the switch goes on, and you go, well, that's it. That's what he was talking about. And so who knows how that works? It's a spiritual awakening, and if you don't know now, what people, and I don't think it's honest of them to say, is that they um they egotistically, they can say that they know something about that. And Sid was bewildered by it, but at the same time, he was uh, never stopped by it. He had an interesting way of just, it was just pour out of him, as you can hear from his, his recordings. It was like it was like an avalanche of truth, and he just let the chips fall, um, and just kept on. And I don't know whether you'd say he was hopeful. Um, we might say that. I don't know. He was just a fountain of truth.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it is.
I heard, and I'm not sure whether this is correct, but that Sid has written many more books than the 6 which are available most of us. I heard there are even 10 books, but 4 of them have never been published. Is that correct?
I believe that might be correct because I know there's my book,
Mm-hmm.
but it's mostly Sid's book. I mean, he wrote most of it. So I'm kind of unique in that he never really wrote a book with anybody else. He didn't really write this with me, but he gave it to me and said, "You put your name on it. This is your book." So I'm sort of in, but that's one. There's another book that I'm aware of that I've never seen that I know that he finished, and it's called The Young Medicine Man. And that's the characters in that book. I again, I've never read it, but it's about the Native American wisdom and the community and this young medicine man. So which he was very respectful of indigenous peoples and their wisdoms. And then uh, there's at least 2 others. There's what he called the third in the Enlightened Gardener and the Enlightened Gardener Revisited. He said there's this other one, and I know he's finished that because I've seen it, and it's kind of in a setting where you know how the gardener talks to a group of psychologists, and then he talks to them again in Enlightened Gardener Revisited, and Sid said once to me, he said the second one is deeper.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, this is my, you know, I thought deeper, like I thought it was just a continuation of the same story, but no, then I started looking at it, I realized, no, this really is deeper. It says more revolutionary things in the Revisited than it does in the first one. And then in the third one, Andy, the gardener, they have invited him to conduct his own seminar. So Andy's in charge of of a whole group of people, and that's the nature of that book. And then come to think of it, there's another book, and that book is essentially Sid's autobiography, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
And I've seen that book too. It's really very compelling. So that was my book,
Oh.
and Young Medicine Man, and Enlightened Gardener 3, and the autobiography. Yeah, so there's at least 4 more books to come.
Oh, we're looking forward to see those.
Yeah. Yeah.
I even heard of one book which would be called The Consciousness Within. That's something I got from, I think, through Dickon Bettinger. He used that in Coming Home, his book, as a quote from Sid Banks, and he's referring to the consciousness within. And I've never heard of that book either. But
I'm not sure that's a book.
Okay.
I think that's a recording.
Oh yeah, that could be very well in the case.
Yeah. Yeah. But as far as I know, that's the 4 remaining books, but as far as I know. Now, I don't know. There could be.
Yours slash Sid's is coming out next year.
Hopefully, yeah, I would
Okay.
like to do it. I would like to do it next year. I would like to. You know, it's the 50th anniversary.
Yes, we
You
know.
all probably know of this happening to him, which was such a miracle. And yeah, so um, that's what I'd like to do. I'd like to share it um, next year.
Wow. That would be a maybe a crown to his work, maybe.
Well, yeah, yeah, it could be. It could
Hmm.
be. We'll see, you know, how it's received, but
Can I pre-order?
yes, I think you said give me 50 copies or something like that. This is good. I've sold 50 copies already. No, I thought that was a very good thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think because I think well, his autobiography is rather like this, but in my book, he he says so many things. Now he says other things through other characters, or as Andy is talking to other characters, but in this book, it's Sid talking. Andy is Sid anyway,
Hmm.
but uh it's Sid. Sid says this, you know, he owns it, and he says, I said this and I said that and I was told this, et cetera, et cetera. And so he talks to these other characters, like I said, one who's kind of going like, yeah, 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 and the other one who's like, won't have it. Um, and Sid would say, you know, has said that if that's um, if that's the reception you get, there's absolutely nothing you can do about it, and that all you can do is wish, you know, wish them well, and leave them alone. Now, I always found that to be a little bit like, because I don't know, like what I don't know what they're going to hear or what they did hear, but I think he was, but that's what he'd say.
Must have been also a very modest man.
Also, what modest?
A modest man. Sid must have been a modest man.
Oh, oh,
No?
unbelievable, unbelievable. Yes, oh,
No,
absolutely.
yes.
Yes, 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 no, incredible, honest, humble, um, patient, because he's spent the rest of his life talking to people that that were fighting him or resisting him or not listening to him or arguing with him. I remember once him talking to this was a seminar, a gathering on Salt Spring Island, which is where he lived for many years, and there was the town drunk. This man was the town drunk. I had seen him stumbling around. You know, sometimes communities have a town drunk, and he was the town drunk. And this man kind of stumbles into this gathering of people, none of that he doesn't know anybody. I knew who he was, but he spots Sid in the middle of it all and goes right up to him and wants to tell him about this and tell him about that and talking to him. And Sid was just so sweet and so patient. And I watched this. I would study Sid because he was always so fascinating to me. And anytime I could overhear a conversation, so I got close enough and he looked at me like And he kind of gave me an expression of like, well, what are you going to do? You know, I mean, he had all these dignitaries. He had presidents of corporations and psychologists. This was his 75th birthday party, and which was a surprise birthday party. All of us flew in and surprised him at this hotel on the island, and then in stumbles this town drunk, and he occupies quite a bit of Sid's time. But Sid was I was thinking, oh, for Pete's sake, you know, talk to that head of that corporation over there, or talk to this writer, or talk, but but uh, but he couldn't. I don't think he could help himself somehow. I don't know what. I don't know how to explain Sydney Banks. I mean, how do you explain something like that? Beyond me.
Mm.
I could watch it. Another thing, I'll tell you one other story that happened. This was at a conference in California, and in this occasion, so there was a stage. And it said, I think it was 2 or 3 days long, and at the end, he stepped off the stage, and people just naturally kind of formed a reception line, and people were thanking him, and people were crying, or they were moved, or they wanted to, or whatever, they, so they were going through the line. So I positioned myself up where I could hear what they were saying to him, kind of unobtrusively. And I noticed coming up in the middle of the reception line, it was a really long line. And it went on for, I don't know, it was a long time until everybody um, had, could say thank you or whatever they were saying. And so, but there was a group of rabbis, and they were all with their rabbi, the curls and their caps and their black robes. These were Orthodox folks, and all men. And so as they came by, there was about 8 of them, and they were all talking in Hebrew. So I didn't know what they were saying, but in the middle of them was a really, really, really old man, and all of them had beards, but he has long beard, and he's all bent over, and he's got this cane, and he's ambling along, and they all have top hats on, or most of them. He did, I remember. And so when they got up to Sid, all the rest of them didn't speak. And this rabbi, the oldest one among them, spoke, who was probably their teacher. And he looks at Sid and he says, it was really simple what he said, one sentence, and Sid said one sentence back, and that was it. He says to Sid, "You're talking ancient Jewish wisdom." And Sid says, "Yes, I know." And then the rabbi says, "What do you know about ancient Jewish wisdom?" And Sid says, "Absolutely nothing." And when he said that, they all erupted into Hebrew, like they were all like they were all talking like they were so excited, because they knew, they must have known what that meant, that here was a man, a Scottish welder, talking ancient Jewish wisdom, and they had been there to hear it, and they were just thrilled. They were thrilled. It was a beautiful thing. Well, listen, I suppose it's time we should go.
It's been wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for all these stories. It's such, well, it gives you somewhat of the feeling that, well, what you have been experiencing, maybe we can get there a little bit.
Yeah. Well, good.
It must have been an amazing period.
And it still is. It still is an amazing period.
Yeah.
It still is. And this is you all are a part of it. And
that's wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you for joining me, and uh, I appreciate you being invited to speak with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and it was amazing stories, amazing experience, and well, I see all these glowing faces, and I think the ladies agree. I can't tell the other ones, but it's been wonderful. We'll finish the recording, and then we'll make sure you get a copy if you want to.
Okay, I'd love it. I'd love it. Thank you so much.
Okay, and would you like to have it with the subtitling?
With what?
With the subtitling?
The subtitle?
Yes.
Just a moment. Just a moment. My serviceman is here.
Coming, yeah, I understand.
Yes, of course. That would be nice. Thank you.
That would take some more time. Then, and what I'll do, I'll send you the raw file anyway, and then I'll say later on I'll send you the file with the subtitling.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.